interview for our friend Alanna Nash. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Thompson and Alanna Nash.
Thompson. You probably don't remember this one, Thompson. But when you first started on Hee Haw, I came to the set and I interviewed you.
You did?
I did.
You did.
I thought you probably wouldn't remember that.
Well, you know who else interviewed me? Maria Shriver, Arnold Schwarzenegger's ex-wife now. And she had just started dating Arnold at the time.
Oh my gosh.
And she was on PM Magazine, if you remember that. And
yes.
How many people have been to Nashville, Tennessee? Show of hands. That's awesome. How many people have been to Memphis? You guys are amazing. You know, I just have to say this before we start, if you don't mind, Alanna. We were just talking about how it's so phenomenal that Elvis's memory is still alive, and he has, my brother brought this up actually, that he's having a second career. Elvis had 42 years of a brilliant career when he was living, and he's had 41 years of a career thanks to you guys. I mean, the fans are the ones who have kept him alive. And I can't thank you enough for that, because it really is because of your loyalty and your love and your devotion that we are here today and that we are all still remembering Elvis. It's really astonishing, and you deserve all the credit. It's the fans. So thank you. And he would thank you if he could. I know he would.
And I want to say before we start, and Linda did not pay me to say this, I was really glued to the book, which is called A Little Thing Called Life, on loving Elvis Presley, Bruce Jenner, and songs in between. This is an astonishing book, and if you don't have it, I encourage you to get it. I think it will open your eyes to a lot of things. And I'm going to ask her quite a bit about it in our time. So it's now 7:32, and I think we have an hour, and I don't want to hog all of her time because I know that you have questions that you want to ask of her too. So we'll stop about 20 after and let you get your questions in as well. I'd like to spirit her off myself and keep her for 3 hours and ask her questions, but
we'll do that later.
But I won't. We'll do that later. But I'm serious about this book. I think, and only part of it is about Elvis. It's her entire life, which is an extraordinary life. We're the same age. I read that and I felt like such an underachiever, all the things that she's done. But do pick this up.
And it is on audio, if you want to download it on audio, and I read it myself. So it took me 6 days, and it's 15 hours of audio. But I recommend that because you get to hear the nuance in the voice when you hear someone who has written an autobiography or a memoir of their lives. You hear like if there's hurt, if there's pain, if there's humor, if there's sarcasm, you can hear it in the voice, you know, as I'm reading.
You can, absolutely can. I know that she wrote this book herself, which writing a book is incredibly hard, so I want to tip my hat to her for that. The quality of the prose I was impressed with, and most of all, I think, I was impressed with how honest a book it is, and that it has, on every page, there's a spiritual quality to it. There's a little kind of maybe some hubbub, some talking going on, and we're so honored to have her here. Can we maybe just quiet down a little bit more? Thank you. There is a spiritual quality to this book, and I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about how your life has evolved to the point where you were able to so wholly give of yourself in that way in writing.
Thank you so much for observing that, because you know, I do truly believe that all of our purpose in life is to be here for each other and to help each other along the journey. And we all have our journey. Elvis had his, Bruce Jenner had his, I've had mine, you've had yours. And and we've all had life experiences that carve out who we are. And if we're not here to help each other and to love each other along the way, what are we here for? It's certainly not to argue and to be resistant to each other, but rather to help facilitate each other's joy and happiness along the way. So I have led my life, hopefully, in a way that I haven't burned a lot of bridges, and that I can walk down the street with dignity and not be embarrassed about anyone I meet along the way that I've mistreated them. And I think that's so important for all of us. And having lived such an extraordinary life, I really felt a responsibility to life to write this book, because I thought, God doesn't afford people such extraordinary experiences and expect you to just sit down and keep it to yourself. You really need to write about it. And it was a difficult thing to do. I'd like to say it was a labor of love, and of course it was. I tried to put love on every page, but it was very difficult, because you also feel a keen responsibility to people living and those who have passed on to really describe them in the way that they deserve to be described, and to honor and respect them as well. So in that way, it is, certainly, hopefully, a spiritual book as well.
I was really touched by that. You wrote that even to this day, I can recall vividly, viscerally, the essence of who and what Elvis Presley was in my life. So here's the big question. What was that?
Wow. Elvis changed my life irrevocably. I mean, he was my absolute first love in every respect. And he was my teacher. He was like, he was a bit older than I, but there were times when he was like my baby. I was very maternal toward him. I was very caring and loving toward him, as he was to me. And he was everything that you can imagine Elvis to be. He was difficult, he was challenging, he was a baby, he was just a big old silly baby sometimes, and had a wonderful, raucous, irreverent sense of humor. He was very, very affectionate. He was a mama's boy, as you all know. He loved his mama more than he loved anybody in life, I think. And he was able to express that love in a very affectionate, respectful way. He loved his fans, he appreciated his fans. He was just everything to me. And it's true that even when I think of him now, 41 years later, I can still feel him. I can still smell him. I can still taste those marshmallow lips, which I write about in my book.
She says kissing Elvis is like kissing marshmallows.
Yeah, those are things you don't forget, right? So yeah, I do write about that in the book, that people have asked me through the years, what was it like to kiss Elvis Presley? I said, well, you just got to get 2 big marshmallows and just, kiss those. And it was that softness, that sweetness, that kind of pillowy. So anyway, I'll stop.
The women actually do want to know more, but maybe somebody will ask them. Okay. You also wrote something that I've always thought. I've always thought he was somebody who, dropped in from another planet. And you say in so many ways he was not of this earth.
So true.
Talk about that a little bit more, if you will.
Well, I used to say that he was such a paradoxical person. He was an identical twin, and Mr. and Mrs. Presley, I call him Mr. Presley out of respect, but Vernon, his dad, told me many times, he said, Elvis was an identical twin, and when he was born, his brother, Jesse Garon, was a stillborn, so he was born dead. And he said there were 2 medicine bottles on the mantle at their little simple Tupelo house, and one of them inexplicably burst without any provocation, without anybody touching it. One of the bottles burst. And Mr. Presley always thought that was like Jesse Garon's spirit that went into Elvis, which made him a dual personality. He was a very paradoxical, kind of person. So that either he was like an angel that had dropped from heaven, and you would just look at him and think, oh my goodness, he's just too good to be of this earth. He's just so angelic and wonderful and generous and kind. or if he got one of his little temper tantrums going, you look at him and go, he is the devil incarnate. This guy is out of control. So he was either or, and sometimes mellow in between, but he was a very paradoxical person, very complicated in his simplicity.
You've been together about 2 weeks when he said, "You know what we've done, don't you? We fooled around and fell in love." Did you doubt this? It was pretty sudden, or did you think it would last? What were you thinking after 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think I was probably like a deer in the headlights, if you know that expression. It was just like, I'm with Elvis Presley. I was in Las Vegas, and I had never been to Las Vegas, and I was a pretty simple Memphis girl, having grown up in a very conservative family, Southern Baptist, and very simple, modest means. We didn't have any money. I worked to put myself through school, and then I found myself in the presidential suite at the Las Vegas Hilton with Elvis Presley. So I was probably still a little bit in shock. And we were lying out in the sun. We were out on the balcony lying in the sun, and we were holding hands. He was in his little chaise lounge, and I'm in mine, and he's holding my hand. And he looked at me and said, "Honey, you know what we've done, don't you?" And I said, "What? What?" He said, "We fooled around and fell in love." And I said, "Well, we did?" "We have?" And he said, "Well, I have. I'm in love with you." And I said, "Oh, me too, me too, me too." But I think I was a little bit in shock because I didn't want to presume to expect that this iconic, wonderful man that I had adored since I was 10 years old in Memphis would fall in love with me. I was just so honored, honestly, and flattered.
And you also discovered he was more than a little needy and more than a little lonely.
He was. Well, he was coming off of a separation. I guess he and Priscilla split up in December, January. This is 1972, and they made it kind of formal in January. And he had been very hurt. He was very wounded. His pride was hurt. She had left from Mike Stone. It's common knowledge. I'm not divulging anything here. This is not gossip. But she had left from Mike Stone, the karate instructor, and he was very, very hurt. And so I think that added to his neediness. And he was just needy anyway. When you were with Elvis, you had to be with Elvis, and he commanded all your attention and devotion, as it should be. Why not? I mean, it was Elvis. He could do that.
Well, I think it must have been around this time frame that you were at home one day, maybe upstairs in the bedroom, and he wanted to make a phone donation to an evangelist.
Wow.
Tell me that story.
We were actually on the road. We were not at home.
Okay.
And that's interesting, because that was a weird thing.
I don't think they know. I just learned it. Steve just told me that story, so if you'll share that.
Yeah. Do you all know what TV evangelism is? Because I know Denmark is not that, swept up in, some of the evangelists. But so there's, in the States, there are these, a 700 Club. That's what it was. The 700 Club, and there are these fervent evangelists, that are hellfire, brimstone. If you don't do this, you're going to hell. And so Elvis and I were watching, some of the preachers, and I've never been a dogmatic, judgmental person, nor was Elvis. Elvis encompassed everyone's belief. Elvis, as President Clinton said one time, our fate in life and sometimes our religion is a matter of latitude and longitude. It's where you're born and what you're taught to believe. So in that respect, we never judged people for being Buddhist or Hindu or, Christian or Jewish, whatever. That's your faith, and God bless you. As long as you're looking up to a higher good, reaching out to your fellow man, to me, that's what religion should be. At any rate, that's a long way of telling you that we're watching these kind of really fervent people on the 700 Club. But Elvis was moved because he grew up Pentecostal, which is pretty fervent, and so he was moved to make a donation to the 700 Club, to these evangelists. And I made the phone call. Hello, I'm Linda Thompson. I would like to make a donation on behalf of Elvis Presley. And they go, "Who? Are you married? Are you living in sin?" I was like, "What?" I just wanted to donate some money, and yes, we are. We're living in sin because we're not married. So it was a very bizarre thing, and Elvis was just like, I won't use the expletive that he used, but it started with an F. Something like, F those people, forget it. We're not going to donate to them. It was bizarre story. I can't believe you know that. I've since donated my money to St. Jude Children's Hospital in Memphis, which is much better, I think, cost.
You talked about how I could be such a baby at times. I want to read a passage from your book, which I thought was very funny. It's about how he chose the dynamic between you. You wrote, there were times when I wanted to be the little girl, and I wanted to be stroked and petted and comforted. No, you can't be the little girl right now, he said, because I need to be the baby. You have to be the grown-up, and I'm the baby right now. How bizarre was this?
So bizarre. You know, when I look back and think about our relationship and how we did baby talk each other, you know, it sounds so inane and so silly and so ridiculous and even kind of embarrassing now. But it wasn't. It felt so totally natural to both of us. My mother was inordinately affectionate with my brother and I, and she would what we call baby talk us, which would be like, oh, come over here, little precious girl. So we've all done it, right? To your dog or your child or whatever. So, and Elvis and I had a tendency to do that to each other because, you know, you want to express your love in unconditional ways like that. So sometimes I was like the mother and he was the little baby and he would be like, I need some attention. Hey. And then there were times when I would be like, I'm feeling kind of small. And then he would be like the father figure. Then there were times we were best friends, there were times we were lovers, but our relationship really did encompass so many different forms. But there were times when, you know, he would call the shots. You're not little right now, I'm little. I need to be the baby, you gotta baby me and nurture me.
As bizarre as it sounds, though, it also sounds really fun and kind of normal. Does that say something about me that I think it kind of sounds normal after a while? But actually, I can see where that would just be fun.
I like you for that.
I also like that he could be sort of just a regular guy at times, and yet kind of push the boundaries. Like there's a story in your book about, I think you've gone to see Don Rickles, and maybe Elvis needs to use the bathroom, but he doesn't get up.
Does anybody know who Don Rickles was? He just passed away. The comedian, the American comedian, was amazing. And he became a very dear friend of mine in all the ensuing years, he and his wife Barbara. But he was the guy that was always sarcastic with people and always insulted people. And so we went to see, and Elvis loved him, and he loved Elvis. But we went to see his show one night in Las Vegas, and when Elvis walked in anywhere, you know, your heart stopped, you stopped breathing, and people would just look, and he commanded such attention, it was phenomenal. But so we went in to see Don Rickles, and we got settled, and the crowd was buzzing. It was like, oh my God, Elvis Presley is here, and you know, nobody was looking at the stage. And so Elvis said, you know, when Don started his show, Elvis said, I gotta go to the bathroom really badly, I have to pee. And he said, but I can't get up because Don's doing his routine, and if I get up, everybody's gonna look at me, and that would be disrespectful to Don. And I said, well, can you hold it, honey? Can you just wait? I said, I don't think I can wait, but I can't get up. So he said, hand me that glass. No. And he said, hand me the glass now. So I handed him the empty glass, and he put it down under the tablecloth and unzipped his pants and peed under the table while Don Rickles was doing his joke. I'm like looking around to see if it was one of the craziest, strangest things. You think the baby talk was strange. That was. So then he picks the glass up and puts it on the table, and it's full. It's like to the brim. And it looks like apple juice. And I just thought, if any of the waiters who came by later and saw this glass would look like, oh, they didn't drink that apple juice. I didn't want apple juice. And nobody ever knew the difference, except those of us around him who saw him do it.
If there'd been eBay at that time, think what you could have made.
Why didn't we have cell phones then?
It's a great story. I mean, it just kind of tells you.
It tells you who he was.
It does.
Really. You know, it's just like this little unbridled soul that, you know, there were times, you know, when he was shy, and other times when he went, hand me the glass, I gotta pee, and go to the table.
So, but it wasn't all fun and funny and great times. As his health began to decline, there was another time when he went to see Don Rickles and went up on stage and began reading from, tell that story.
Yeah, then we went to see Don Rickles, and Don actually called him up on stage. He said, you know, we have an luminary in the audience. This is the one and only Elvis Presley. Elvis, stand up. Elvis stood up. Don said, come on up here, Elvis, come on up. So I was like, okay. So we went up on stage with Don, and he took his Bible, and because he carried a Bible a lot, so he took his Bible up on stage, and he opened the Bible and started reading from 1 Corinthians 13, which is, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I understood as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. And you know, I looked through a dark glass mirror darkly, whatever, I can't do it verbatim, but it's 1 Corinthians 13 in the Bible if you want to look it up. So he started reading, and he kept reading, and he kept reading, and he kept reading, and Don's going. And finally, Don said, hey Elvis, are we going anywhere with this, or are you just jerking off? Okay, well that was kind of, you know, reading the Bible to that, so it was very bizarre again. So Elvis says, no, I just wanted to read you a little passage, but he had to get him off the stage because Elvis was taking over, reading the Bible.
So his behavior begins to get erratic. About when? What year?
You know, it's not that it began to get erratic. You know, that's a misconception that I think people have. It was always erratic. He had a bracelet, an identification bracelet. On one side, written in diamonds, was Elvis. You flip it over, and in diamonds it said crazy. And he had had that bracelet for a very long time. And, you know, his whole family had a predilection, a predisposition toward drug abuse, alcoholism. So I think he had struggled for a very long time since he was in the Army, when he was stationed in Germany. And this is from Elvis's lips to me. He told me this. He said, you know, I started taking Dexedrine in the Army. The Army distributed it to him to keep him awake on the post. And for someone who has that genetic predisposition toward drug abuse, you know, it's not a smart thing to do. So he started taking Dexedrine to stay awake when he was in the Army, and it was cold and he was on his post. And that really started the ball rolling with his prescription drug abuse. Because when you take an upper, then you have to take something to bring you down. When you're down here and you're going to go on stage, you have to take something to bring you up. And you know, it's a cycle. It's something that happened to Judy Garland, to Marilyn Monroe, to so many people who feel the pressure of fame, and especially someone like Elvis, who came from abject poverty and obscurity, and he rose to heights that no one ever will achieve again, I believe. You know, to that kind of fame and adulation, and to be catapulted into that stratosphere. He was ill-equipped, you know. It's like, I don't need to make excuses for him, but, you know, there was no Betty Ford Center then. There was no the plethora of rehab centers that there are now, so there was nowhere to go for help. And so he was always, you know, had the predisposition and was always using, you know, sleeping medication and uppers and downers. But I think, you know, I would say like, toward the end, like toward 1976, it became, you know, we'd been to the hospital a few times. I had checked him into the hospital because I noticed that his breathing was shallow and I was worried about him. And, you know, he couldn't fire me. I wasn't working for him, so I could be the one to say, you need to stop doing this. You need to, let's go to the hospital. But there was no rehab. It was just two doctors who would help him, Dr. Knott and Dr. Fink at Baptist Hospital. So anyway, he had this cycle of going in and out, but toward the end, you know, I just started to think, I want a normal life, you know, and that's when I, you know, left him. 8 months before he passed away, I just thought, I can't have this responsibility forever of keeping him alive, and I was not getting any sleep. It was really like taking care of a newborn baby, and at some point, you have to kind of save yourself first, and I had really lost myself in Elvis. I loved him so dearly and so unconditionally that I had just given everything that I was, and there was nothing, I was depleted. There was nothing left of me, I felt. So I had to leave and, you know, I wanted a normal life. I wanted to have children, I wanted a family, and I knew that was not a healthy situation to bring children into. So, but it wasn't like, you know, all of a sudden, or, you know, he had always had the problem.
Mm-hmm. So when he would have these close calls with medication, when the plane would have to land, for example, would he get scared and cry and say, "Oh my God, I could have died. I don't know how I let myself get this out of control"? Or what? You spoke with him quite seriously about this was a really big problem. What would he say?
You know, I think like anyone who relies on medication or drugs and they deceive themselves into thinking, I have this under control. So no, he never did any of that. He always felt like, oh, that was just a little slip up, you know, maybe I have pneumonia, or, well, why do you think you have pneumonia? Because you inhibited your breathing so much. So I think that, you know, like a lot of people, they just don't want to accept that they have a problem. And Elvis really thought that he would live to be in his 80s. You know, we had the discussion many times. He thought that he would live to be really 85, 86, 88, you know, all the keys on the piano. But he really didn't. I said to someone earlier today, I think when he passed away on that horrible, fateful day, August 16th, and hopefully he ascended into a greater place, he was more surprised than anyone, like, oh my goodness, how did I let that happen? You know, he just was kind of delusional about his drug problem, and he thought that he was strong enough to handle it. And, you know, he was for the years that he was, and, you know, then all it takes is, as you know, one time.
I do know. I was telling Linda last night, I lost a friend who had the same problems as Elvis, and she thought the same thing. It wasn't really going to get her. And then one day it did. You spent very little time around Colonel Parker. Colonel gets a lot of blame, you might say, for perhaps stagnating Elvis's career. You were there when the offer came, or you were in that time frame when the offer came for A Star Is Born. We the fans hear all these different stories about, did Elvis really want to do it? And Colonel said no, because he wouldn't get top billing, or some of the, I think Jerry Schilling thinks that Elvis really didn't want to do it and just had Colonel make up the story to get out of it. What's the truth, Linda?
Elvis wanted to do it. Elvis was very excited about the prospect of working with Barbra Streisand. Barbara has since become a dear friend of mine as well, and so I've heard her side of the story as well. But Elvis told me then, you know, he met with Barbara and John Peters, who was her then boyfriend and also a big movie producer. They came to the Las Vegas Hilton and saw his show, and then they came backstage and they had a long meeting, and I was there. I'm not in the meeting for the whole thing, but there. And Elvis said, you know, this is going to be a great opportunity. We're going to do A Star Is Born, and, you know, I'm really excited about it. This is finally going to be a role that I can sink my teeth into. I've never gotten the kind of acting role that would show me as an actor, and that was a big frustration for him. His favorite movie that he ever did as far as acting was King Creole, because he felt that he had the best script and, you know, the best chance of showing his acting ability. And he could have been like Marlon Brando, and he fancied himself being that kind of actor. So he was very excited about doing it. And the Colonel finally came around, and I think the Colonel couldn't make the deal. And Elvis just left all the deal making up to the Colonel. Elvis didn't negotiate. So the Colonel came to him and said, son, you can't do this movie because you can't be depicted as a loser. This guy in the movie that you would play is a loser, and you're a winner, and you can't be depicted as a loser. Well, it was a movie part. That doesn't mean you're a loser. It means you're playing a role. So it was a big frustration for Elvis, but he went ahead and went with the Colonel's advice. And I think the truth is the Colonel probably couldn't get the back deal that he wanted, you know, the side deal that, yeah, I'll put this in my pocket and we'll make this deal work, because it's been documented that he made a lot of deals in Las Vegas, you know,